Hello and welcome back to Overbooked. I'm Amanda and today we're gonna be doing my October wrap up. My September wrap up was very late. My October wrap up is still late, but not as late. Round of applause. I'll take a bow. October was a busy month. It was very jam-packed, full of just hanging out with friends, going to events. One of my friends got married, my beautiful friend Brenna. It was such a lovely weekend. Also just trying to catch up with school and just regular life stuff. So I did not get a ton of reading done. I also felt like I was in a huge reading slump. I just felt like I didn't feel like reading. And I also feel like this contributed to some of the books that I was reading. I just didn't find a lot of interest in them, or it just wasn't it. And I think I need to think about that going forward, because one of my goals for 2022 was to make sure that I am really reading books I want to read and DNFing books that I don't want to be wasting my time on. And I haven't been doing a great job of that. And I think a lot of the factor for that is, one, because I'm in a lot of book clubs right now and I'm trying to keep up with those, which I think I also need to manage a little bit better. Two, I also just felt like I was trudging through some books this past month that I internally felt like I could just finish, but in reality, I probably just should have let go and maybe focused on something else that I'd rather read. Regardless, I did end up finishing about 4 books, so let's talk about them here. Let's get started. The first book that I finished in October was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I read this based off of a recommendation from a friend of mine, and I really needed this. This is probably a key example of how this year I've really fallen in love with romance, and I'm just really taking it in stride. I really have been enjoying the genre, and The Unhoneymooners was no exception. I loved it. It was so good. I read it in one night. The Unhoneymooners takes a look at 2 characters who are in a wedding where one is her sister's getting married, and the other love interest, his brother, is getting married. And they're at this wedding and they kind of just are not vibing. They don't get along. They're kind of enemies. And at the wedding, everyone gets food poisoning except them. The main character, her sister, insists that, her and this guy take the honeymoon that was meant for the bride and groom, because you can't get a refund on it. It would just go to waste. Somebody should use it. And so she wants her sister to use it. So the book takes a look at these 2 characters who don't really enjoy each other's company and don't really like each other, going on this free honeymoon trip where they have to pretend to be married. They have to, keep up for appearances. Otherwise they have to refund the trip. I can't remember those specifics. It was fun. It was a really fun book. They're on this resort. The main character is trying to apply for jobs, and she recently finds out that she got one. She sees her future boss at the resort, so she has to play this game of being married in front of him for the purposes of keeping this honeymoon secured. And there's just the guy sees somebody from his past at the honeymoon resort place, and it's just there's a bunch of stuff that's happening, and it's just a fun ride. And I just loved it. I ate it up. I really did. I loved the characters. I loved how much depth we had with not only them, but the side characters. We get a lot of insight into what's going on with their family and their friends. And I just felt like it really added to their character, which we don't see in the next book I'll talk about. So I just really liked it. I loved how it came together, and I just really enjoyed it a lot. And it's what I needed. It's what my soul needed. So the next book I finished in October was The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. I read this because I had this ambition for the fall that I wanted to do this football reading rec vlog where I was gonna just read books centered around football, and that's how I found The Cheat Sheet. I obviously did not do that vlog. One, a lot of the books I wanted to get were not instantly available at my library. There's other books I needed to read, and it just didn't work out. But regardless, I still read some books centered around football because I thought it was fun. The cheat sheet was not fun. I have a whole rant review that I just posted, so I will link that and it'll be in the cards. So go check that out if you want a more thorough, in-depth look at the cheat sheet. What I'll say is the cheat sheet is between Bree and Nathan, the two main characters. One is a dance instructor, the other one's an NFL quarterback. They've been friends since high school. They both have feelings for each other. They both don't realize it. Something happens where they have to fake date. The book is idiotic though, because the characters are just dumb and don't communicate and don't pick up on even the slightest small hints. It's infuriating. Do you want to hear more? Go check out my rant review. So number 3, the third book I read this month was The Divorce Colony: How Women Revolutionized Marriage and Found Freedom on the American Frontier by April White. So I was really looking forward to this book, and this is one of the books I think that I should have just given up. I don't even know how I discovered this book because no one's really I haven't seen anybody really talk about it. The reason that I found interest in this book was because I didn't really realize there was this influx of people migrating to get divorces back in the day. And I also didn't realize people were migrating to South Dakota. So I grew up in South Dakota in Sioux Falls, where the majority of this book takes place. And I had literally no idea. I had no absolute clue. So when I saw the description for this book, I was like, oh my gosh, that's really interesting and cool. I would love to learn about that, which it was. And I will say it was very cool to learn about this time period and instance where there was like this influx of people migrating to my hometown and the impact that it had on these people's lives. I think that was really cool, but it just was done in a pretty dry way. Let me get to what this book is really about. So in the late 1800s, divorce wasn't readily accessible to women or men. Some states had weaker laws or less restrictive laws on obtaining a divorce. And in South Dakota, you could be a resident for 90 days and then request a divorce. And it was, pretty simple. A lot of other states required a residency of like a year or even longer. So this became like the ideal situation for some people where they could be somewhere for 90 days. It's like, it's like 90 Day Fiance, but the opposite. They could be there for 90 days and move on with their lives. This, of course, was really only accessible for white privileged people of the higher class. I mean, these people literally were just hanging out in a hotel for 90 days, like doing nothing. The book was broken up into like different women's lives and I think pretty notable cases of divorce that happened in this time period, and then with a sprinkling of community sentiment that was happening within the community of Sioux Falls and South Dakota, and the community sentiment in the country as a whole. It was kind of funny to see how many people would come to Sioux Falls and then literally immediately leave because they hated it so much. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere. It's a barren wasteland. Overall, I think it provided a lot of great information about a part of history I wasn't really aware of, which I think was really, really cool. Regardless if it was in my hometown or not, I thought this was kind of really interesting to take a look at, especially for women during this time and really trying to take initiative in their lives, make decisions that, that might otherwise be out of their hands. But it was a very short book, so I thought that I was going to be able to get through it pretty easy. It just was really dry and just came off kind of like flat to me. So, and it definitely read like a nonfiction. So if you're not someone that leans towards nonfiction or is prone to pick up nonfiction, I probably don't recommend this for you, just because it definitely reads like one. Like there are some nonfiction books that I think read like a really interesting like thriller or fiction novel, but this one is not it. And if you're looking for something short that you don't mind taking your time going through, then I would recommend. There's some interesting pieces of information. I don't know, I think there'd be pretty few people I would actually recommend it to. Maybe my mom. Okay, so the last book that I read was Friday Night Lights: A Town, a Team, and a Dream by H.G. Bessinger. So this is you'll notice it's following the theme of football and going on that trend. And I've heard so much, I think everyone's heard of Friday Night Lights, either the book or the show. And I was like, let's give it a try. I was a little weary about this book when I first started it. I didn't really know if I was gonna like it or if I liked really the premise of it, but it did really warm up to me, and I thought that it offered a pretty good perspective on high school sports and sports overall. I think Friday Night Lights, for those of you who don't know, is centered on a team in Odessa, Texas, and it's this high school team that's like known for being great, and town really is just centered around their football team. That's what they live and breathe for, essentially, is this football team. The book is like this deep dive into all of the players, the community, the town, and the people who are there, how they got there, what their background is, and just the overall nature of what this does to a community. I thought it brought up a lot of really great points. There was a particular chapter or section of the book where it talked about how these students who were in football weren't really expected to excel in their education portion of high school. Were really given a lot of slack from their teachers, and there wasn't a lot of expectations for them. Grades were magically fixed, especially when there was like this rule that went out that if you you had to like maintain a certain grade average in order to play in high school sports. And there was actually this huge controversy with this other town and this team that would eventually beat, I don't know, that's a spoiler. It's a nonfiction book's been out forever, I'm sorry. That eventually would beat Odessa. A player on their team that essentially like lifted them up was heavily impacted by this. Like he did not perform well in school, was essentially given a fixed grade so he could play football, allowed him to be that way. And there was a lot of court cases about it, surrounding it, a lot of controversy. And it was just interesting to take a look at. I do think that, and I hope that it's gotten a lot better. I know that, and I can't speak, I guess, from experience. I was about to say, like, you know, when I was in high school, that was still a thing. You had to maintain a certain grade point average. There was people who would not play because they didn't have that grade average that was, you know, needed to play a sport. But I guess I don't know. I don't know the intricacies, and I don't know if there were certain players that teachers were told to, you know, move some numbers around or something. I have no idea. But I can see how this could quickly get out of hand and how important this could be. But I think it is detrimental to these players and these students. It's like a shock where there was one student in particular who got hurt and he was no longer able to play on the team, and his grades suffered extremely. He went from being like, you know, a B average student to getting like D's and F's. And it's an interesting correlation, and it's very obvious to see what's going on. Something that is really like concerning, that these students aren't given any kind of guidance or help to achieve academic success, or even just to get success to move on to the next stage of their life, whether that be college, technical school, or some sort of career elsewhere, is just really sad. And how much just just lays on their shoulders for these games. There was a deep dive into the look of the quarterback of the team, and he just had, you know, bouts of anxiety, a lot of worry would get into his head a lot, because a lot of these games would rest on the decisions that he would make in like a 2-second play. And I just felt like that's a lot to ask of a high school student who, you know, is between the ages of 14 to 17. It just was mind-boggling to me. It was just a really good look. I also think that so this takes place over the 80s and late 80s. And so there's a lot of talk about the racial divide in this section of Texas and the characteristics of the tensions there, not only between blacks and whites, but also Hispanics, and just the class play as well. And also the whole oil boom, and then the bust essentially, and the roller coaster ride that is truly, and how that affected the area and the town. In the end, I ended up really enjoying this book. I got through it pretty slowly. I listened to it as audio, so I was listening into it like while I was like walking or running, but I still really ended up enjoying it a lot. And I think it's worth a read, especially if you're interested in the sports, or if you have like an interest in how like sports and school need to balance. And I definitely have an interest in that. And one of my next books I want to read looks at the college sports system, and I think that's an even more interesting analysis. I really enjoyed this book. So I was pretty surprised at the end. I actually enjoyed it as much as I did. Okay, so those were all the books that I read in October. Pretty light, pretty like, here we go, but it was still, I think I am trying to keep in mind going forward for the rest of the year to maybe really focus on some more books that I want to read. I think I'm really going to try to gravitate toward some more romance. Just maybe look at some of the books I've recently put on my TBR and try to see if I can get those at the library, instead of focusing on books that I think I need to read, or, you know, maybe even dropping a couple book clubs just to, you know, not try to force myself through some books that I don't necessarily want to get through. You know, you live and you learn. In the comments below, let me know if you've read any of the books that I talked about today, or if any of them sparked an interest, or your thoughts on them, what you've been reading recently. I would love to hear it. As always, thanks so much for watching. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you guys next time.